Hi, my name is Tim Serwitz. I'm the Vice President of Education for the Linux Foundation, and I'm joined today with Henry Levenberg, who's a learning design professional with extensive experience in delivering both digital and in-person technology training. He has worked with a diverse range of audiences, including thousands of students and professionals from Fortune 500 companies, startups, consulting firms, government organization, and NGOs. Uh, Hello, Henry. How are you today?
How's it going, Tim?
Doing well, thanks. So I know that in addition to that rather impressive CV so far, that you are the global training owner for the cross-disciplinary embedded AI courses for SAP, and that you also lecture at Ohio State University. Those seem to be pretty different places. How are they similar? How are they different? Tell me about that.
Well, it seems like just kind of like a long job title. It's a lot of word jumble there, but essentially, what it comes down to is, we both come from the world of instructional design, and for those who are listening who maybe don't come, from that, SAP, the company I work for, has combined basically the role of subject matter expert, or the person who's an expert in this product, and the training owner. And so I sort of serve in that role too as well, especially when it relates to our embedded AI portfolio. And so what that means is, as many people know, SAP sells a variety of different products. Each of these products have different features that are related to AI. And so I serve as the training owner on all of those too as well, which means I sort of make sure that we're sort of updated on content as well as deliver content to the thousands of people who pay money to hear me talk, so which is a good thing too as well. And at Ohio State, for example, I serve more in a capacity of a lecturer too as well. So there's this wonderful program at Ohio State that takes people in the trades who have been working for a long time, who are interested in transition, and turns them into full stack teachers, right? So people who go and train, and so it's a certification program, or if they have a bachelor's degree already, it's a master's program. You can elect to do that too as well. And so I play into the education technology piece. So a lot of people come to the program who maybe don't know, the tools of the trade in the education space. So I teach them on that, and so how to get started, as well as analyzing what we refer to as technical literacy. So like, how, a good way to point it is, how good are you at computers, essentially. So we test for that a little bit. And so I teach people a little bit how to, improve their technical literacy, what things to work on, because people come from a variety of different backgrounds.
Well,
Now,
that's perfect,
yeah,
though. Go ahead, Henry. I cut you off there. Sorry.
no, it's no problem. And so, together, those two actually, play a big role. So a lot of people in the SAP sphere that I speak to, they come from, either they're true beginners, they have no experience too as well, which is where I was, just a few years ago. They've been working inside of the systems for 20 years or so. So that at some point, it's like, oh, you should be teaching this class. And so, it basically it correlates because it's basically two groups of people who come from a variety of different backgrounds but are here to learn something completely new, right? And so that's sort of what I like to refer to it as.
Sounds great. I was going to say, because that seems to tie in well with the subject of our talk today, which is generative AI for leaders. And how do I capitalize on opportunities and avoid the pitfalls? So, wide range of experience. You've taught everybody from newbies to experienced folks, corporate America, students. So, obviously, this is part of the reason that we're having the conversation is, this is a field that you're the person to ask these questions of. So AI is everywhere now. That's, AI, your phone has AI, my refrigerator someday will have AI, like don't drink the milk. So with it becoming so common, and a lot of people in business and leadership know that they need to start using it more, that's the good news. I have a great tool. I should use it. Well, what's the bad news? Let's start off with the bad news first. So, what are some of the common pitfalls and issues that go along with generative AI?
Well, I like to think of it, and I like to start when I talk about AI with people who maybe come from a variety of different backgrounds and like to relate it to something. As a child, did you ever play the game Broken Telephone? Do you remember that game?
Is that the one where you whisper and it comes back at you?
Yeah. So a lot of AI is based on the principles of what they call machine learning. Essentially, you have this massive data set. So all of this information you're essentially feeding to machine and you're telling it to come up with something out on the other side. You're putting it through a machine and then it comes out with something completely new. And as a child, this is actually an international game. I didn't realize this because I have a lot of relatives who are from other countries, and so I'm taking this and like, oh, they have different names for it. But the principle of the game is essentially you have a group of kids, right, in a line, and it's as many kids as you want. And so someone at the beginning, they come up with a message, right, and this message is, we'll say it's the training data, and then it passes on year to year until eventually at the end it comes out with something new. And usually this is humorous or whatever it happens to be. And so what it comes up with, if it's right at the end, then the game isn't very fun. But essentially, that's the goal of AI, right? So essentially, you have all this training data, and then something new comes out that is close to what you want it to come out with, right? But the other thing too, as well, is that often, if you remember this game, is that at the end of it, it comes out with something that's completely incorrect, right? It sounds confident because the person who basically just heard it from the last person, they think, oh, this is right. It sounds right, but essentially, it's completely wrong and has no basis. And so in the AI world, we like to call this a hallucination, right? So a hallucination basically means it's what I talked about, right? So it's completely incorrect or misleading, but it sounds so right. If you speak with a lot of confidence, it might sound right. And a lot of this is the basis of essentially prompting, right? AI really isn't good at basically asking follow-up questions, right? It doesn't have a way necessarily to, especially in the older models, to verify facts or adapt to sort of unseen scenarios. And so essentially, when you give it a prompt, it gives it an answer right away, right? It doesn't come up with follow-up questions that essentially might be able to provide more context. So it's only as good as the input you give it, and it's only as good as the training data that it's actually trained on. So that's a lot of what we think about when we think about where does AI, what are some of the pitfalls of AI, is that it comes up is hallucinations, essentially, is what it comes down to.
Okay, hallucination does sound like a fancy word for lying, and that's problematic when I'm basing
Well,
my business off of
yeah.
it.
Well, when it's confident, it seems like it's right, but that's the problem. Is if you don't know what you're talking about, if you don't know what you're listening to, it could be just completely wrong, and you have no idea.
Okay. No, yeah, it's which wire do I cut? Red wire, blue wire? The blue one. Oh, well, he seems to know what he's talking about, and that can't
Exactly,
be no
exactly.
social
Yeah.
circumstance. Okay, well, no, that makes sense. Well, with that in mind, if the quality of my training data is part of it, and I know a little bit about AI, I know that some of the data has been synthetic. In other words, it's not real; it's been made up. Well, there's this RAG concept that has grown. Does RAG solve that for us? So if I'm a leader and I want to start using generative AI in my office, whether I sell used cars, I mix truck tires, whatever it is, knowing that it can hallucinate, I've heard about this RAG that I can have an outside source that helps me get better at it. Is that a solution, or should I keep looking, or what does it mean in today's business that it might hallucinate, and how do I fix it?
That's a very good question. So, RAG, is retrieval augmentation, right? So it basically it allows for AI not only to use the training model, which we call pre-training, right? So it uses the data that's already been given, right? It can be a massive amount of data, but allows for what they call more like a post-training model, ability to pull sources from a variety of different places and generate content organically from some sort of provide maybe for a business what we call business context or a strategy piece based on information it pulls. And so if you've ever worked with a consultant before, which hopefully the people listening to this have worked with a consultant before, the answer that is often given is, is RAG a good thing? Is RAG a bad thing? Is AI a good thing? Well, it depends, right? So it really depends. But the big question is, it depends on the level of data that you're working with, right? Is this data organized? Is this data accessible? And often than not, when we go back to the pitfall question, the data isn't as good. The data provided, even in the RAG context, isn't as good as you might suspect. So I'll give a little example. So yesterday I was scrolling on Reddit, and on the front page was a post from a user who was talking with a major telecom provider, right? Which already has a lot of bad bad juju when it comes to customer service wise. Nobody who's ever talked to a telecom provider has left the conversation particularly happy. But in this case, this user's mother had passed away, and they were trying to do something as simple as cancel a service. And so they're talking with an AI chatbot, where essentially the AI chatbot was given the data, right? They were provided the business context. Essentially, if anybody wants to cancel a service, you should go through and try to see if they can upgrade or move to a different plan or whatever happens to be. But in this context, the context that was provided, which is if a user passes away, they were not given the right data or the right information to point towards. Basically, okay, well, we'll cancel it, no problem. Have a nice day. So sorry for your loss, right? And so the problem is the customer obviously in a very vulnerable place, screenshotted this, posted it on Reddit, and it went instantly viral. Right. So this is sort of, this is a case where, especially, when it comes to pitfalls, where, yeah, you can provide the right business context, but if that context isn't correct or isn't complete, then it just goes back to that first question, right? This is a common pitfall. If the training data isn't there, if it isn't correct, then it could present a challenge for you.
Can you train your models based off of that? In other words, I don't want to go back and generate a new LLM. I realize I suddenly have this issue. Is it something that's fairly easy for somebody that's decided to invest in generative AI to do this on the fly? Or how big of a lift is it to start coaching the answers so that when a death is part of it, that yeah, it's kind of a final deal. That's, how do we make sure that if I decided to use it, that I don't get caught by that same problem?
Well, I have a couple not so nice family members in my family who are lawyers. And something it'll tell you about the law, and this applies to AI too as well, is that the team with the most documentation is the one who wins, right? And that's what it essentially comes down to, right? You can train AI, and there are fantastic AI solutions that use RAG that it can pull from business context and provide this information. Now, the companies selling these solutions, right? They're fantastic. They've created a fantastic product, but you need to basically implement it correctly in order for it to work. And so it comes down to the more documentation and the more correct documentation that an AI agent has, for example, the better an output is going to be. So, for companies looking to implement this too as well, you can do it in a very effective way as long as you have the correct documentation and a lot of it, right? And that's a challenge for a lot of businesses today.
I think that's exactly the challenge that a lot of it's big. It's a big thing. Well, before I start the journey, so I decide that I need it. My board has said we got to do it. What kind of things are best for AI, and are there any areas that it just shouldn't be done?
Absolutely. So that's a really good question. So let's think about AI. Like a lot of companies today, you look at OpenAI, Google's Gemini, Perplexity, Anthropic Cloud. A lot of their goals and a lot of their strategic missions is to move towards artificial general intelligence, right? And so the problem is that today, and this is a good thing too as well. So I don't want to dismiss it, that everything you see today is going to be artificial narrow intelligence, right? And so when you're looking at solutions, right? You have to find specific use cases that these things are going to work through, right? And so I mentioned too as well, customer service is often not a great use case for this, even though it's advertised to be. The business of a lot of these AI companies is we want to sell as much product as possible. That's the point of any corporation, but it doesn't mean that the solution is particularly good. Customer service presents an immense challenge. It's often a massive pain point for a lot of customers. You've got essentially the biggest loss leader in a company that's losing you a ton of money, that provides a solution, that is often complained about with customers, and anything you can do to rectify that is a challenge. But the human portion of customer service is something that is really hard to replicate, because the idea of artificial general intelligence is we can do, the system can do exactly what a human can do. And a human shows empathy, it shows ethics, it shows things like this, something that maybe a machine isn't there for that at this point. Now with sort of a side by side companion, if you do have that customer service agent that is working with the client, you can sort of have an AI agent maybe next to them, where they can type the questions as the customer goes and be able to find the information very easily, so they can provide the customer with an answer. From a cost perspective, you get people off the phone quicker, higher customer satisfaction, things like that, especially for those direct to consumer companies, those telecom companies per se, that have such a that bad output. But I think a lot of on the other other end of the thing that would be a positive output for AI is something that is sort of underinvested today, which is I think marketing. So I think marketing provides a tremendous amount of opportunities for companies to sort of go through and be able to come up with solutions that work best. In today's world, something like there's a statistic I think that's out there that Gen Z and millennials are 60% of the time they're not going to Google to search for things, right? They're going directly to AI. Now, if you can tailor your content to as well to feed into AI, you can create the best, queries and marketing and things like that. That can present, working side by side with a human to approve it, that can be a tremendous amount of opportunity for you. And from an investor standpoint, AI is sort of a loss leader. I'm going to invest in AI today. I'm going to tell my board I'm going to invest in AI because I know that maybe the returns won't be seen right away, but at the same time, it can create a positive brand outlook. That's sort of the idea of marketing. Ideal marketing is improving your brand in the marketplace. If you can combine these two as well, I think that's where the tremendous, high value, low risk opportunity is today, is in marketing.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, to your point, a lot of AI companies are saying it can do anything. If it takes if anybody can do it, we can do it, and just for a nominal fee. So it makes sense to be aware of some of that aspect as well. With that in mind, that there are some areas that'll be great and some that might need a little bit more maturity before implementing. Where do I start? So does it depend on what my industry is? If I sell truck tires, if I dig ditches, if I'm a septic tank company, if I'm a Fortune 50 company, does that determine how I start using generative AI, or is it the same pretty much across the board?
No, I mean there's several different use cases for several different industries. And I think a good starting point for this is because, as we've seen too in the marketplace, I use that telecom example. That's a high risk, there's a high risk associated with something like that. When you see a customer who interacts with an AI agent, doesn't have the satisfactory appearance, posts on social media, that, decreases brand value, lifetime customer value. There's a tremendous amount of risk associated with that. But when you're looking at a company from an executive perspective, if you can outsource your risk out of your company, especially when it relates to AI investments, that's sort of the best position you can do. And the best part about this is that when it comes to these companies who are selling these AI solutions, which includes what we call a hyperscaler in the marketplace or a cloud provider. So like your Amazon Web Services, your Microsoft Azures, these clients who as well who are selling the services as well as ERP providers. So SAP, Oracle, SuccessFactors, or Salesforce, things like that, who are selling solutions. They have thousands of use cases available that provide an immense amount of technical documentation available for you to essentially pull from, that provide use cases that are within the scope of that artificial narrow intelligence that can work well. So I'll give like a good example for this too as well. I know that SAP personally sells this as well as a variety of other solutions is the idea of invoice processing, right? So invoice processing is a challenge for a lot of different companies. You get invoices that are not in the right format. If you're a big enterprise or like a university, everyone inputs the right information at the same time. But that's not the case for a lot of different companies. You get different invoices for different services, and they all look quite different. And so it involves a lot of human input to basically pull the right information from this. And so all these companies offer a service that essentially fixes this problem for you, right? You send it to an AI agent, it basically pulls the right information for you, puts it in the right format, and sends it, to your accounts payable and accounts receivable. And this is a well documented use case, right? You go through and the companies who are selling this service to you, they have the companies it was implemented with, the documentation, the technical specs, even how much it'll cost per document, all the way down the line. And so by doing this from an executive perspective, as I mentioned before, you're totally outsourcing your risk for what AI could do wrong with your company to something else, because you're able to look at these use cases, analyze what works best with your industry or company, and then be able to implement it well, and get that nice rubber stamp from the board that says, you're using AI today.
Is there, that you've been talking about kind of a higher value versus lower value risk, high risk, low risk. I think about cases like schools, an elementary school or maybe a clinic where the majority of the work is somewhat routine, filling out somebody's chart, keeping the records of how a student did during the day, their mood and so forth. AI could potentially make that much faster, but is there a way to double check it, or what is the check and balance if there's the where so most of the times, like going to the local clinic for me is, it's wellness checks and minor stuff. But I suppose somebody with something horrible could walk through the door. How does one check that, yeah, 95% of our cases are benign and very straightforward that fit that use case, but what about the 5%? Is it something where AI will tell you, like, I don't know this and kicks it out to a human? Or, if somebody walks in with the plague, probably not common. So would AI know not to say, please wait in the lobby and cough a bunch on the people around you where everybody else is getting a sports physical that day?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and the problem with AI, when it comes to perception in the marketplace today is people assume it's a whole lot smarter than it is. And it comes down to sort of our human level of the way we evaluate intelligence. You go to school today, you go to elementary school, you memorize some words on a page, and essentially you're able to recall them really easily. Some of the news that came out in AI, I want to say about a year ago, is they took AI and they had it, take the MCAT, which is going to be your medical school application test, or it has to take your boards, or essentially, and it had like a 96% approval rating. And so you look at that, someone might look at that study and go, oh, wow, AI is really close to doing what a doctor can do, right? Because it's essentially being able to recall this information really well. But you have to look at it in sort of a top level view. When I essentially have, an open book test, I can look at this from I can look at any information. I have access to all the information in the world. I can essentially pass any test I need, right? Especially if I can recall it really quickly in an unlimited time format, things like that. And so the problem with those two markets, right? You look at health and education, right? Health and education are very sensitive marketplaces, right? There are AI use cases that play into all of this. Certainly a lot of the technology players like Epic or Pearson are working on solutions to best help their learners. But a lot of these are what we refer to as side by side companions, right? They work with doctors, they work with nurses to come up with solutions because you're absorbing a lot of liability as your company, especially if you're delivering an AI answer. That's essentially on you if they're wrong. And the time is yeah, 5% of the time they're wrong, but the time they're wrong, they're really wrong. You're dealing with life and death scenarios. And when it comes down to it from a customer perspective or a patient or, a student perspective, do you really want to be wrong when a life is on the line?
That would worry me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from that, basically, at the moment at least, it's best to use it as a leverage. So the AI spits out an answer, and then I have an otherwise qualified person kind of evaluate it's it's the calculator to the abacus that somebody has to punch in the right digits, somebody has to interpret it and said, did I punch it in right or did I type it wrong? It's speeding up the process of math, but it's not replacing my understanding of math or trigonometry for that matter. So is that a fair way of looking at it, that this is a change in the efficiency or speed of business, that I'm no longer using a clay tablet or an abacus. Now I have calculators and the spreadsheets, or is it really a change in type where the transistor kind of made it a big difference? Like that's a change in method from a clay tablet or an abacus.
It's what it is it's I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's essentially it's a really good tool, right? And the tool gets a little better every day, but we have to respect that a tool is only the best when it's in the hands of the best practitioner, right? If you can't interpret it to as well, it doesn't make someone an expert by using the tool. And so that's a lot of the issue with AI today is that people, once again, people assume it's really smart, and it is. It's extremely smart. It's probably one of the best tools we have on the marketplace for a lot of different solutions. But it's no more than that as it expands. So I think that it is a calculator, but you need to still take that math class, you know?
Okay. Well, okay. I still have to study math. That's kind of a bummer, but okay.
Oh
Um,
well, oh well.
yeah, right. You'd mentioned that there are some industries. Marketing was one of them. Um, are there others that you would say should look strongly at it, or this is where you should lead with it and then gradually bring it other places? Or is what's if you were to tell me, okay, if you're in one of these five areas, you most likely to use it, what are five areas that you should wait or always make sure it's checked before the answer is given?
That is a very good question. And I want to be a little bit industry agnostic because you can spend a lot of time. And if you take a lot of AI courses, they'll basically tell you that it's going to disrupt every industry. And that's the truth. It really is going to disrupt every single industry. But kind of being industry agnostic, I think the best thing that companies can do right now is focus on what can be what we refer to as hyper automation. So it's an industry term that we like to use in my world. It essentially means how can you rapidly identify, document, and automate as many manual processes as you can. And every industry has them, right? My dad is a florist essentially, and so if we get an order from out of town, we have to look up who is the right florist, right? And that's a great use case for AI too as well. So you look it up on Google, you can pull this information from the web. It has all these sort of florists that might serve this area, and they can provide a list of phone numbers. Now that's a manual process there. Now calling the florist and explaining, what the customer wants and what the flower is, that might not be something that would work well with AI. Maybe down the line, if it provided enough business context. But I think companies can focus on that now. And it's a twofold decision because if you're able to rapidly identify and automate processes in any industry, in any company, in any organization, you are then creating that documentation that is needed to create those massive, AI models that might come out in the next few years or whatever it happens to be, so you can create those solutions in the future. I mean, you worked at a big company before. I've worked in a big company before. Finding answers is difficult, right? Especially if we're talking about the larger a company gets, the more difficult it is to find, what it is. People say at, SAP, you might ask, 10 different people a question and you'll get 11 different answers. And that's a very common issue too as well. So, that can be all fixed with a level of documentation. If you can manage your knowledge together, whether it's be processes or what it happens to be, then AI can best serve whatever industry, whatever company you're working in best.
Okay. So if I do a evaluation, I mean, a lot of people were kind of hoping that AI was the silver bullet that I don't have to think or hire more. I'll just use sprinkle some AI on it, and my business complications will go away, profit goes up, cost goes down. I would love that too. Well, what is the way? So assuming I know the risks, I know the pros, the cons to some extent, and I decide that generative AI is something that I'm going to start using. What is the starting point and like how do I get started with this in the smart way? If I'm going to write out a strategy for my company to do for the next year, what should I be writing? What should I be asking? What questions should I be asking as I create that strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think if you can focus like, every business decision, you can operate. It's very simple to look at this, but you've got that four quadrant matrix, right? What is high risk, high reward? If you can operate in sort of that low risk, high reward matrix too as well, when it comes to AI, that's probably your best market positioning at this point, right? And there's, things I talked about too as well. You can focus on manual processes to be automated too as well, especially in that quadrant, the low risk, high reward, your invoice processing, things like that involve some sort of human, approval process, that of course is going to be good. But I think when companies are building their strategy, I think the thing to focus on is essentially treating AI as an 18-month cycle, right? How can we best serve our company in the next 18 months? I booked this webinar, for example, about a month ago. And so since then, there's been a ton of opportunity and a ton of changes in the market today. And a month from now, that might be completely different. And we have to expect and be able to, see this change. So I think, if companies are talking and building an AI strategy for the long term, you have to basically listen to your technical teams, listen to your IT teams, see what data is usable to as well, what maybe is not. But the biggest thing is to remain agile. Don't overinvest in a tool and knowing that a better tool might be on the market today in about just a few months or a year from now, and you want to be able to, best set yourself up for success on whatever the market looks like in 18 months.
Okay. If I were a non-technical person, and like you've used terms like, do we have good documentation? Do we know what those manual processes are and write them down? You said you can't find info at a big company. Small companies work for them. Pretty similar story. But
Yeah.
let's say I'm not already in AI. When you say documentation I need, like, do I need somebody to write it in a special way for AI to understand it? Do I write it in just our native language in English? Do I need to learn how to code? Like, if I want to get really to brass tacks, when I'm like, we're going to use AI, 18-month investment of where we're going, do I have to have a team come in that speaks the special AI language, or can I have my existing folk who may not know AI? They may, like if I have somebody caring in a nursing home, they're really good being nurses and they know medicine, but they don't know the computer system perhaps. So how are they going to document it properly so that I can make sure that the right meds are being dispensed and so forth and helping them? How do I help them if they don't know AI already?
No, that's a very good question. And I think it comes down to sort of 2 points, whether you want something that's external facing or sort of outside of the scope of the company or internal facing, right? But both kind of have roughly the same answers. So this is the idea too as well that kind of plays in a rag called MCP or Model Context Protocol. Now it's a really complicated scenario, but essentially, in an ideal world, there's a perfect way to write things to as well that has some sort of information, but when it comes to working with someone who maybe is non-technical, it's perfectly okay. I mean, if you can sort of set the standard for how you want things to look, what sort of right answers and things like that, and then create your own maybe internal model, what you can do is you can create what we call an A/B testing protocol. So an A/B testing protocol essentially means, okay, does something sound right? Does something not sound right? Is it right or is it not right? Because AI essentially, like that telephone game, they're just taking a bunch of guesses, right? And it's a bunch of guesses, and more often than not, they're right. But the person reading those guesses is going to be the determination of whether it's right or not. And so, if you can sort of be, sort of implement in every model today, did you like the response? Did you not like the response? What sort of information are people looking for? Be able to sort of go back and forth with a model from a technical team standpoint, but work with your process experts, provide them with the tools to as well to succeed, and tools that are working best for them. So when I think about that, I think about maybe some sort of drag and drop process builder tool, working with something like that, or maybe SAP certainly sells one of those. But the other thing is there's many on the market today, as well as any sort of documentation tool, maybe business site generator, something like that, where anybody and everybody needs to work in this. But the biggest thing to remember here too as well is it comes down to this: the more documentation you have that is close to right, that's the best you can do, right? And as long as it's right, and as long as you have a lot of it, that's the best use case you can use for AI today.
So the you mentioned that SAP has a tool. It's not that I have to use that special tool. If I have some other wiki page and I've done a pretty good job of keeping our processes, the script updated, and it's just an HTML, is that enough? Or again, do I have to find a way to rewrite everything in some special format or language?
So when we think about AI and the models is handling, about maybe 6 to 12 months ago, yeah, you need to have that special language. But AI is getting really good at what we call, from a technical perspective, sorting unsorted data, right? So being able to take information that maybe is not in the right format and be able to extract insights out of that. And that's perfectly okay. If you have an ERP provider, if you're a big business who has this sort of information, that's great because the information is sorted and it can be used right away. But a lot of small companies, a lot of medium-sized businesses, they don't have this information available. So really, any information is better. So yeah, make that business site, make that information, as long as you're writing it down, something to consider. Now, I will put a caveat to as well, because also this idea in some small and medium-sized businesses today that is coming about, where they want to take a lot of company emails and then use that to train data. And that brings up, potentially that could have some upside benefits, but that brings up some ethical considerations too as well, especially for sensitive information. So you also want to be careful too as that you have a trove of data, but you want to make sure you're using your data correctly, and making sure that the people who are putting it out, it's easy, it's accessible, but it's also they get to choose what data goes out on the marketplace.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. If I have a business and I provide, I'm trying to think, teeth whitening service.
Of
And
course.
I have locations over 10 states. So I have a lot of staff and they are expert at teeth whitening. So they're
Yeah.
good at it. We have a process written down and so forth, but again, they're not technical people. The sensitive part, can I just avoid the emails then? Or, the ethical considerations? What's what would you, if somebody asked you, hey, this is where I'm at. I have a teeth whitening business, I have 5,000 employees, I've handled 25, you know, 25,000 people this year.
Yeah.
How do I start? What's literally step one?
So step one is probably unifying your data, right? So, a lot of data is going to be disconnected. You probably, again, we're going with the hypothetical teeth whitening service, but you probably have a payment system too as well. You maybe have some sort of customer interaction system or CRM perhaps. And so basically unifying this data, I'd say was step one, whatever it happens to be, making sure that's all connected with each other with some sort of central repository, right? And then from there, you don't want to ask too many of your process users to essentially validate a concern. But if you can make a tool for your employees that is useful for them, the best place to start is going to be an internal system, right? So if they can work internally, with a tool that works best with them, that would be a great place to start in terms of working with customers. You never want to go too external because as soon as you go external, you're exposing your risk portfolio out the door, right? You don't want to expose any sort of confidential information, which especially in these small and medium sized businesses is going to be something that often, more often than not, is even with 10 locations, is often not well labeled. They may have a proprietary service that someone sent an email somewhere or is on some document on some local drive or whatever happens to be. You don't want to expose that too much. And then once you perfected it, once you send it out the door, then that's a good deployment model. So many major corporations today, they have generated their own model too as well. So whatever happens to be, they're working with OpenAI or whatever happens to be. It's very easy to set up. It doesn't take a lot of whatever to create your own AI model that takes the business context. Though it does cost a little bit of money, I think that's a high value thing. It's high value for two reasons. One, you're generating data. You're being able to help your employees serve their customers better in a variety of different fields, especially as generic as this. Maybe you're thinking about, or your employees too as well. Your process experts are thinking about solutions that can best serve the company. But the other reason is that most companies today, most people are using generative AI. Something like 99% of people have used it. And if you don't think your employees are distributing sensitive company information to public models today, you're poorly mistaken. You're poorly mistaken. They're using it today. So if you can give them a solution that is company approved, that would be the best way to do it and not expose that, sensitive business data that they can train on or whatever it happens to be.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, there's probably one more thing that I'd really like to learn from you. You touched on it already. I work with emerging technology and constant change. You mentioned AI is in constant change, and you mentioned an 18-month innovation cycle. What are the other top things I should stay on top of since AI has constant change?
Absolutely. So that's a very good question. So the thing I referenced to as well when I was thinking about the 18-month is there's a really good book by Ben Horowitz. It's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. So if you it's about his journey. He's an investor in this major VC firm, the top VC firm in the world called Andreessen Horowitz. For those, VC is venture capital, right? So it's people in Silicon Valley who invest in startups, take a little bit of equity, help support their clients, and then build companies from there. But before he did it, he had his own startup. And the startup pivoted 5 times. From a business perspective, you have to stay agile, but pivoting 5 times if your entire business model is something that's a real challenge. And so one of the early business mistakes he made is essentially, what I was referencing earlier is that he had hired executives from major companies to come in because that's where he wanted to be in 10 years, right? And so the biggest thing is that when you're doing that, unfortunately, they're going to think a different way. They're going to act a different way. And so, I'm excited right now about RAG. I'm excited about agentic AI. I'm excited about LLMs, but staying on the books, right? Listening to your technical partners to serve their needs best is something that I think would be the number one thing you can do. If you have a vendor, whatever it happens to be, especially a technology aligned vendor, talking to them, maybe don't invest, too much money in, a massive consulting contract. But if you have a vendor, they're constantly releasing news updates and things like that, new product features, pay attention to that, stay focused on that, but stay agile. That's the biggest thing too, as well. Make sure you're not over investing in something, that could be solved right away. If I knew, for example, that, RAG existed 10 years ago, I would have never done this. So what's next? Who knows, right? They're all behind closed doors, and we'll get the news every day. But you don't want to over invest in something that lay out a strategy that makes sense, create that documentation, but don't over invest in something that is maybe could be replaced in the future.
That makes sense. Henry, last question for you. If you had 30 seconds and you had one thing that you really wish everybody understood about generative AI and building their own strategy, what would that one thing be?
That is a very good question. I could probably think of hundreds of things that I would want people to know about, but I think the thing that I think people need to focus on is that treat AI like a complete newbie at a company, right? It's in the door, it's first in the door. They have no experience at all. And if you can think of AI that way, that's probably the best use case you can go from there. Train it to, from the beginning, but don't expect too much on the first day.
Okay. Well, sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time, Henry. I really appreciate it. I already knew a little bit about AI, but I learned quite a bit today. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Tim.